Hello, faithful listeners of Legends Through Time. Oldies tonight, we're delving into the most devastating chapter of ancient Greek mythology, the story of a cosmic war that shook heaven and earth. It's a story of Earth's rage, heaven's arrogance, and the rise of the ancient giants who challenged the gods on Olympus. Get ready to dive into the grand tale of Gigantomachy, the gods' war with the giants, a story that speaks not only of power, but also of balance, destruction, and hope born in the midst of chaos. Fire up your imagination because our journey begins now. In the early days, the world was not divided as it is today. Heaven and earth were still united in eternal unity. Uranus, the sky, stretched infinitely wide, embracing Gaia, the fertile earth that was the mother of all life. From their union, the first generation of cosmic beings was born. The Titans, the one-eyed Cyclops, and the 100-armed creatures of immense power. However, Uranus feared the power of his descendants. He saw in them the potential for rebellion that threatened his throne. So, whenever Gaia gave birth, Uranus immediately locked up their children in the dark bowels of the earth. Gaia suffered as her body became a prison for her offspring. The pain and anguish grew into deep hatred. In a fit of rage, Gaia created a scythe from the world's strongest metal, adamantium, and gave it to Kronos, the youngest of the Titans. On a starry night, as Uranus descended to merge with Gaia, Kronos ambushed him and slashed his father's limbs to shreds. Uranus's blood dripped onto the earth, fusing with the soil and giving rise to monstrous creatures: the Erinyes, goddesses of revenge, the Meliae, tree nymphs, and the Gigantes, mighty giants who would one day challenge the gods. Gaia, though freed from Uranus's oppression, was never at ease. When Kronos repeats the cycle of tyrannical rule by swallowing his children, the hope for a new order is dashed. Kronos was defeated by his son Zeus in the Great War of Titanomachy. The Titans were shackled and banished to Tartarus, except for a few who did not fight. The rule of heaven passed into the hands of the Olympians. However, Gaia was outraged that her grandchildren treated her children like trash. In a burning rage, she awakened the Gigantes, earth giants born of Uranus's blood. Gaia whispered vengeance into their souls. They grew in fiery craters, deep caves, and desolate peaks untouched by sunlight. They were destined to subvert the celestial order and end the rule of the gods. In a corner of the world untouched by Olympus, the Gigantes rose slowly. Their bodies were gigantic, snake-haired, stone-scaled, and flaming-eyed. They were one with the elements. Some ruled over lava, some commanded the earth's lightning, and some could grow mountains with just their footsteps. Alcyoneus emerged as their leader, granted immortality as long as he remained in his homeland. He was the firstborn of the blood of Uranus, a giant whose body could absorb the power of the earth beneath him. Porphyrion, whose ambition exceeded all limits, became their right-hand man and war leader. On his shoulders, he held a hatred for Zeus, the god of thunder who was the epitome of the order that Gaia despised. The Gigantes began to organize an army. They made their way to the crater of the mountain to build weapons from the smoldering lava. They uprooted giant trees and fashioned spears as tall as towers. They gathered stones from the ocean floor and formed shields as thick as cliffs. Gaia summoned an army of giants from every corner of the world: Mimas from the mountains of the far north, Polybotes from the bottom of the deepest sea, Ephialtes who had two heads and hated sunlight, and Enceladus whose body burned like the core of the earth. All gathered for one purpose: to destroy Olympus. The sky became dark. The mist from the Gigantes' bodies covered the mountains. The sea waves thundered like war drums. From underground, magma began to rise slowly. Nature was getting ready. A cosmic battle was inevitable. The gods on Olympus began to feel the shock. Zeus's lightning could not penetrate the mist thrown by the giants. Poseidon heard the roar of the sea that did not belong to his dominion. Hades, from the depths of the underworld, felt the earth shake as if in eternal torment. The gods began to prepare. Athena sharpened her spear and summoned the Aegis, the heritage shield of the Titans. Ares practiced on the illusory battlefield, stirring up the battle spirit. Artemis and Apollo warmed up their arrows. Hermes strategizes to spy on the enemy. Everyone knew the Gigantomachy would be more devastating than any war ever fought. The summit of Olympus shivered in the roar of the giants. The sky is no longer blue, but fiery red from the smoke and lava spewing from the earth's mouth. Gigantes charge from all directions, lifting giant rocks and plunging spears from trees filled with fiery thorns. The cosmic battle began. Zeus led the defense from on high. His lightning bolts streaked relentlessly, striking the bodies of Gigantes trying to climb the slopes of Olympus. The boom of the sky echoed, but the mist and darkness meant his attacks were not always on target. Porphyrion charged with unprecedented speed, his gigantic body leaping over the valley, smashing into the divine terrain with a fist that could flatten the hills. Athena darted between the enemy lines, her spear smashing into the head of the two-faced Ephialtes. She shattered the bronze helmet the giant wore, and instantly black blood gushed from his skull. With the speed of the wind, Athena plunged Aegis into the body of another giant, imprisoning him in inexplicable fear. Poseidon summoned giant waves and created an earthquake that split the ground. From within the cracks, a flood swept away an army of giants coming from the east. Polybotes, the sea giant, retaliated by summoning deep creatures from the depths of the ocean. His trident clashed with the teeth of the sharks controlled by the giant. Ares raged without strategy. He whirled like a storm, slashing mercilessly at giant bodies. But his brutal power began to be eroded by the never-diminishing number of enemies. The blood of gods mixed with the blood of giants drenched the ground. On the other side, Artemis and Apollo shot arrows from the sky. Artemis's arrow pierced the eye of the giant Mimas, while Apollo sprinkled sunlight that burned the giant's body that was used to living in darkness. However, the Gigantes did not relent. They grow from the earth, and as long as they stand on the ground, their strength is constantly replenished. Gaia herself protected them with the roots of ancient trees that held the gods in place. For every giant that fell, 2 more rose from the cracks of the earth. Zeus began to realize that this war could not be won by the gods alone. In the chaos of battle, he summoned an ancient force that had been prepared since the days of Titanomachy, his own son born of mortal men, the demigod Heracles. Heracles came wearing the skin of a Nemean lion as a protective cloak, his bow slung across his back, and an olive wood mace that had crushed many a beast in his hands. His presence on the battlefield was like a new blaze of light cutting through the fog of darkness. The gods gave way, and with a steady stride, Heracles advanced to the front lines where the Gigantes were sowing destruction. Heracles' first move was against Alcyoneus, a giant who could not be defeated as long as he stood his ground. Heracles shot a poisoned arrow through Alcyoneus' shoulder, but the giant bounced back as if unharmed. Zeus and Athena immediately teamed up, shaking the earth beneath the giant's feet. In a massive earthquake, Heracles dragged Alcyoneus' body out of his birthplace onto neutral ground. There, Heracles struck him with a giant mace, shattering his bones and shooting a final arrow into his now weakened heart. Alcyoneus collapsed and never rose again. The victory galvanized the gods. Athena brought down Enceladus with the help of Heracles, who smashed a giant rock into his chest. Then Athena buried him under Mount Etna, which would later spew fire from her eternal rage. Apollo and Artemis took aim at Ephialtes with gold and silver arrows that pierced both his eyes simultaneously. Porphyrion, seeing the defeat of his brothers, went mad. He stormed Olympus and tried to break into Zeus's own palace. But Zeus's thunderbolts stopped him, and Heracles, with the strength of a man and the endurance of a god, leapt up and struck Porphyrion with his mace in anger. As Porphyrion's body fell, Heracles' arrow soaked in the blood of the Lernaean Hydra pierced his heart. Porphyrion groaned and disappeared in a swirl of smoke and fire. One by one, the remaining Gigantes were destroyed. Dionysus used wild grapes and sacred trees to bind Tubera and drive him into madness. Hermes lured the young giants into the cunning traps he had prepared in the steep valleys. Poseidon lifted a huge island and threw it at polybotes, trapping him under a giant rock that would later be known as the island of Nisseros. Hades sent the spirits of the fallen Gigantes to the deepest depths of Tartaros, ensuring they would never return. For a long time, the world shook with the roar of war. But now, the earth was still. The smoke began to dissipate. One by one, gods and creatures returned to their places of origin, bringing with them memories of a war that would live forever. After the great battle that shook heaven and earth, the world was shrouded in silence. The sky was clear again, but scarred. Olympus stood tall, but no longer flawless. The fog of battle slowly lifted, revealing ruins and ground drenched in the blood of giants and gods. Zeus sat back on his throne, his eyes looking far into the horizon of the world they had saved. However, he did not feel arrogant. He realized that power was not just about victory, but also about maintaining balance. She solidified Heracles' place among the gods, giving him a place in the sky with the stars. Gaia, who had witnessed the destruction of her children, wept in silence. She did not appear before the gods again. She chose to stay in the depths of the earth, hiding her anger in the core of the world. But the gods knew that the Earth Mother's anger was never truly quenched. The fallen Gigantes were buried beneath mountains and islands, their bodies forming the ridges of the earth, and some are believed to still move in their sleep. Erupting mountains, shaking earthquakes, were all taken as signs that the giants were still dreaming of awakening. With the end of the Gigantomachy, the gods reinforced the order of the cosmos. Zeus guarded the sky, Poseidon ruled the sea, and Hades guarded the underworld. The human world grew up among them, inheriting legends about the great war that once shook the world. The Gigantomachy symbolizes that every power is tested, and even the gods, for all their immortality and power, are never immune to threats from within and without. But for a long time, the world was calm again. Olympus shone in a new peace. The gods looked down on the world from on high, wary but peaceful, and Heracles, the savior, shone eternally among the stars. And so the story became immortal, told through the ages, as a reminder that courage, loyalty, and balance are the pillars of the world order, and that even in the greatest of wars, hope is always born of resilience. And that's how the war between heaven and earth reaches its end. The Gigantomachy became an enduring legend, not just a tale of the gods' triumph, but also a warning of the earth's wrath and the courage of a demigod's savior. Between the thunderous voice of Zeus and the roar of giants buried in the mountains, we learn that even in the midst of destruction, there is still a place for hope. Thank you for being with us on tonight's episode of Mythology on Legends Through Time, Oldies. See you in the next tale, because legends never really sleep. They're just waiting to be retold.